When we talk about weight stigma in healthcare, it's really easy to find horror stories. Pretty much every fat person I know has at least one. Whether it's something relatively subtle on up to being denied surgeries and life changing and life enhancing, occasionally life saving treatments. And, I don't necessarily put my personal history out there because there's so much out there already. And I want to avoid being horror porn. I'm here to take beautiful photographs and create artwork and educate and write and do all the things that I do without being somebody that you work with because you feel sorry for me or because you pity me or because you're fascinated by my horror stories. And there can be a real there's a real challenge in the health at every size community and the adjacent communities, body positivity as well, where people who are in thin bodies and have a lot of thin privilege take our stories and use them as examples in presentations and as examples in academic research and use these stories to build their own careers because these stories are horrifying. But they also become separated from ourselves, our fat bodies, and used as these, oh, aren't fat people treated so badly? That's terrible. In a way that builds thin people's careers. And then inevitably the benefits of that telling that story never make it back to the actual person whose story it is. Because it is appropriated and used to build someone's career rather than enhancing the career of the person who experienced that. So I don't often tell these stories, but I want to share this one because it's an example of what happens when fat people are not able to advocate for themselves. The kinds of things that happen. This was about 10 years ago. This happened just after I discovered fat acceptance as a movement, but I was in no place to be able to advocate for myself. I went to a primary care doctor who was new to me. Like many fat folks, I'd had such terrible experiences with primary care doctors that when I moved to a new city, I just didn't find a new one until I absolutely had to. And so I ended up with strep throat. And so I needed medication, so I had to seek a doctor. And I don't remember how I found this doctor now, but this doctor was in a very, very small body. And this doctor was openly disgusted by my fat body. She didn't want to touch me. She treated me very poorly. And at the time, I just figured that was how life was. And I was not in a place where I was able to advocate for myself because I didn't know that I could. Doctors had all the power. I had zero power. My responsibility was to suck it up and do whatever they told me without questioning, period. And that is where many fat people exist because that's what we're taught. That we don't have any power in that relationship. So, I go to the doctor with strep throat and I did get treatment for the strep throat because a positive strep throat test is a positive test. It was very clearly what was going on. But she had a bunch of other things that she wanted to discuss with me as well. And long story short, this doctor lied to me blatantly. This doctor told me that I had a health condition I did not actually have. And to treat that condition, she put me on metformin. Which is a drug that is used to treat insulin resistance, diabetes, PCOS, and similar conditions. However, it also has an off-label usage of weight loss. And this is not, like all intentional weight loss, this is not evidence-based. It is not effective in the long term, and it is not a way to make bodies smaller. But this doctor lied to me to put me on this medication in the hopes that it would make me smaller. This is also medication that can have really awful, disgusting side effects. And I was very lucky. I did not experience any of those side effects. In fact, I experienced nothing. Nothing. The metformin did nothing. It did not change my perfectly normal and fine blood sugar numbers. It did not give me side effects. It was just like drinking water. It just did nothing, which in retrospect is good. But I was on this medication that I did not need for nearly a decade. And I did not question it. I did not, I didn't fight it because I believed this doctor. And then as I read more about weight, stigma, and healthcare, and I grew in my confidence and I started advocating for myself, I revisited this medication and was like, do I really need this? What is this actually for? And in the interim, I had moved cross country and I went through a couple of more doctors because at this point I was actively searching for someone who was health at every size aligned, or at least weight neutral. And so I went through several more doctors within the span of a few years, and nobody wanted to pull me off of this medication because they seemed to all hope it would make me smaller at some point, despite the fact that it had done nothing. And at one point I was at a primary care doctor that I was trying to work with, and I said, I don't have any condition that metformin would treat. I want off of it. We can do whatever testing makes you happy, but I want off of this medication. And she said, well, we can't pull you off of that because that's what's controlling your blood sugar. I said, I've never had blood sugar issues, ever. She said, well, that's because the metformin is controlling it. I said, I didn't have blood sugar issues before the metformin. She said, well, I know, I think that's what's controlling your blood sugar. That's what's keeping you from being diabetic. And I said, okay, pull me off the metformin and we'll test my blood sugar and see if I'm diabetic. She says, no, we can't because it's the only thing controlling it. Otherwise, it'll be bad. So this doctor was not willing to believe me about my own lived experience, my own experience of my body, my own test numbers from before I went on the metformin. And so we went around and around and around in circles. And finally, I threw my hands up and I found another doctor. And I was lucky enough to be able to get in with an actual health at every size aligned doctor who tested my blood sugar and then had me go off the metformin and tested my blood sugar again. And just like I had said, I'm not diabetic. And the thing is that I want to come back to that in a second, but I'm not diabetic. I was never diabetic. And so I was on a medication I didn't need for almost a decade because I was lied to. And the condition I was lied to about, that's my own medical information, but it wasn't actually diabetes. But this whole succession of doctors refused to let me come off of this medication I did not need, leaving me at risk of all of the side effects of this medication because they thought either that my fat body would automatically make me diabetic or that it would make me smaller. And that is just, it's just mind-blowing. Almost a decade on a medication I did not need because people could not see past my body. And I want to come back really quick and say that when I say I'm not diabetic, as a fat person, people assume things about your body, and it's really easy to fall into the good fatty role and say, well, I have a fat body and I'm not diabetic, so I'm okay. And that's not what I mean when I'm saying that. I'm just saying that I'm not diabetic. But there is so much shame associated with diabetes that I want to be really clear in saying that if you are a fat person with diabetes, there is nothing wrong with you. You are not a moral failure. You did not cause it by what you eat. We know that it's mostly genetic, and also caused by, it can be kicked over into activity by stress, which weight stigma carries stress. And so if you are a fat person with diabetes, I'm not flexing on you. I just want you to know that you are just as worthy if that is a condition that you have.